they absolutely probably have more evidence in their favor in terms of the U.S. government's been studying this for a long time. There's parts of the U.S. government that have zero doubt, quote unquote, that non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction has been long going, and government officials are aware of that fact.
Today we're covering a man named Matthew Pines. I've covered him on the channel before because he said this.
I believe the coup de grace will be coming sometime this year with someone that everyone would recognize if they watch, if they paid attention to the news, you would know this person.
Because you see, when he made that comment about this coup de grace moment that was going to happen, people listened. And according to him, that moment has not come yet, but he did do another podcast interview, and I listened to it, and it was fascinating. And in today's video, I'm going to play a clip from that interview. And I found another interview of Matthew Pines from a year ago from a clip that only had about 400 views, right? So most people have not seen this. And he made some comments about Bob Lazar, Radiance Technologies, that I found quite fascinating, and the connection between Bitcoin and UAP, right? But first, let's get to his brand new interview that he did on a podcast called Mr Obnoxious. Now, these are the same two gentlemen that interviewed him before when I made that first video, right? And Danny Knowles, who is one of the podcast hosts in this interview, messaged me with this new interview, so I thought I would cover it. And it is fascinating because people are listening to Matthew Pines, right? And I will say that when they ask Matthew Pines, what got you into this? I more want to know, how does he know some of the information he knows, right? But in these older interviews, he doesn't really bring up these moments, right? So he's kind of talking about it in the same way we would, in the same vein we would, right? So I don't know. I find the guy interesting, right? He's so well-spoken about the topic. He's probably one of the most well-spoken people about the topic I've ever heard, meaning he can convey what is happening and what has happened in a very succinct way so that you can understand it. I'm not saying he has more information than you or I, although it seems to me he does based off that first coup de grace comment, right? But it's just the way he presents the facts and information. He's just very well spoken. So without further ado, let's jump into this first clip, again, from Matthew Pines on this new podcast interview on Mr. Obnoxious. I'll put a link in the description so you can check out the full interview. It's fascinating. It's 3 hours long. But this is one particular piece that I found to be quite interesting. And what he brings up about AI, right, and UAP and that connection, you'll see what I'm talking about. Roll the clip.
It's kind of funny to me that this policy question and this philosophical question and technical question about the potential future emergence of artificial superintelligence is fully within the Overton window now, right? You have senators getting briefed on it. It's kind of the big debate in Silicon Valley and San Francisco is bringing about the AGI God, and we're close, and when is superintelligence going to emerge, and billions of dollars of capital being spent building this hyperscale cloud and training clusters. People fully accepted this as a live possibility could happen in the next 3 to 5 years. What would be the disruptions to society if we created such a system? Fully normalized part of the discourse now is this, what was previously considered this sort of wild internet fringe belief that you could create, a supermind. And I think UAPs are not part of that conversation, but they absolutely probably have more evidence in their favor in terms of the U.S. government's been studying this for a long time. There's parts of the U.S. government that have zero doubt, quote unquote, that non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction has been long going, and government officials are aware of that fact. What I just said was quoted by retired Colonel Carl Nell, who helped draft the UAP Disclosure Act. So we're in this weird state of cognitive dissonance, in my view, where a subject that is taboo, that shouldn't be, right? That's like very real and very serious for a large portion of the security apparatus, but hasn't diffused into the public consciousness. UAPs, sort of being, it's slowly moving in, but it's still kind of marginalized as sort of a taboo fringe subject. Whereas the idea of artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence is fully normalized, is the basis for billions and billions of dollars of capital investment, very high level strategic policy discussions. We're actually leveraging a lot of this as part of our motivation for constraining China's technological development, blocking their access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So it's having like practical effects. But there's no high confidence consensus or belief that we're actually going to create a artificial superintelligence like anytime soon. It's looking at a bunch of scaling curves and just extrapolating out. A bunch of just like a chart of like more compute, more capability, just draw the line up, and therefore AGI God, right? Meanwhile, there's folks inside the government that have craft materials, biological materials that have been studying this for decades. Most people aren't aware of that fact. And we're making pretty strategic policy decisions and having normal debates around this artificial superintelligence question and having a serious discussion. And we're sort of snickering at this UAP question. I'm like, guys, like
same thing.
This is these should maybe they are. I mean, separate question of the ASI question is whether it is as serious as it should be. I think it's a serious question, but the UAP question is just as probably more important than that question. And so that's all I'm just these are all important questions. They're all going to converge into our public discourse and our policy discourse in the next few years. And you just don't want to be surprised.
That connection, right? That AI, we just assume that this curve is going to happen and go up. I find that quite fascinating what he's saying, to be honest with you, and I can understand why he thinks that. And to be honest, I never really heard anyone talk about it, and definitely not that way, right? AI is brought into this conversation. In fact, some people think that the NHI is using AI to some extent, but anyway, just that correlation is quite fascinating. So, but look, as I mentioned previously before, we are going to get into some other clips from another interview, again, a year ago. I'll put a link in the description. You can check out the full clip, and because he says other things, right? But I just picked out a couple pieces here, but please go support that video. This first part, right? It was interesting. They just right off the bat start and just ask him about Bob Lazar. I thought that was fascinating. So here's his answer of what he thinks about Bob Lazar.
I don't know any special insight into Bob Lazar other than what everything, people speculated on him. And he has a pretty fantastic story about working at Area 51, seeing craft, maybe even seeing bodies, telling stories about Element 115 and some advanced propulsion system. And, Roswell was real. The whole story there. I think he's most likely a fabulist, but I also think that some aspects of what he's getting at are probably true, right? So, I think you can reject him personally and also hold a decent credence in kind of the broad thrust of what he was saying. If you're just getting into the UAP stuff, I would not start with Bob Lazar. I think there's lots of other places to start
go deep, man.
That are much higher fidelity and also a lot more serious.
Bob Lazar can be very divisive for a lot of people, right? And I can already tell in the comments what's going to be happening. But it is interesting, his take on that, right? Because he does go on to say what you should be looking into and paying attention to and where you should start is just what's happening now with UAP legislation. So again, go check out the full clip. You can hear the rest of him talking about that. Let's get to another part of this interview that I found interesting, which was when it's brought up about Radiance Technologies, right? Hear what he has to say about that.
There's a company called Radiance Technologies that's based out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is in UFO lore where the craft was taken. But it's also in actual reality, it's that's a discount potential Roswell reality. But it's the head of it's where the Foreign Technology Division. It's where we capture and reverse engineer foreign technology. And so the Radiance Technologies is a defense contractor, affiliated with that. And they recently hired two folks from the U.S. government that were recently one the head of the UAP task force and two the chief science officer. And Renaissance Technology specializes in doing basically AI machine learning for our space surveillance architecture. So how to look for objects using our satellite capabilities and characterize them using machine learning. And the basic, gripe has been we've characterized only the objects we were trying to characterize. So everything else was noise and tossed out. Like if it wasn't like obviously like an ICBM or a hypersonic missile, it was meteorite, just throw it in the bin. No analyst even looks at it, right? That's how these systems work. They just generate huge amounts of data, and until someone like asks to build a new classifier for a certain signature, you're not going to look at it. And that's basically what they're doing now.
All right, so that's interesting, right? Radiance Technologies, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and this technology, right, to categorize, right, and what's coming in and out, and using AI to do it, machine learning, right? This is all fascinating, and we're breaking new ground, right, and how that's going to evolve. So it kind of brings it all full circle in a lot of ways. So be interesting to hear what you think in the comments. Please tell me below. Now, let's get to this last part, which I just think tangentially is relevant, right? Which is the comparison he makes between Bitcoin and UAP, how Bitcoin was viewed and how it's viewed now, right? How it was viewed when it first came out and talked about versus how it's viewed now. Same thing with UAP, right? Basically the stigma, right? It's just a more serious talking point. So I found this piece interesting. So here's Matthew Pines talking about that.
In the past 5 years, I think both Bitcoin and like UAPs as a topic have like evolved in like the sort of like Overton window like along a similar trajectory. Yeah. And there's like I think that actually has to do with some dynamics associated with social media and how like these types of more kind of somewhat fringe, ideas or kind of social organizations can sort of nucleate and create kind of like a reinforcing dynamic that like can generate like, like through like minority rule influence and to like propagate through the wider social network and start to have like salience in the broader sort of normie discourse, where Bitcoin is now becoming less of like a fringe topic and now like a normie topic of policy conversation. And there's like an ironic synchronicity between like the actual policy dynamics where like there's a single senator, Senator Gillibrand, who's also been like one of the key co-sponsors of like crypto legislation with Senator Lummis. And she's also the key co-sponsor of like the defining UAP legislation, amendments to the 2022 and 2023 National Defense Authorization Act co-sponsored with Marco Rubio. So it's, I don't think there's any like deep state, like weird conspiracy here. I think that it does show that these two things are indicators of a broader trend, I think, in how these topics can kind of become more to the center of discourse. But like UAPs were not memed into existence. Like the U.S. government has been focused on these topics for decades. And in fact, the recent National Defense Authorization Act, the like signature bill that like, funds our military, has like 40 pages of provisions just on UAPs, which is the rebranding for UFOs.
I don't know about y'all, but this was a fun video to make. And Matthew Pines, like I said, is quite fascinating to listen to. He's done many other podcast interviews, but focus just on UAP. I see him starting to do a lot more. So please go check out the links in the description so you can watch those full interviews. And again, we'll just wait and see, right, what's happening. So anyway, thank y'all so much for watching. We'll see you guys on the next video. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace!
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.